I live with arthrogryposis and I've been treated all my life. I've had over 20 operations. Does not mean I'm cured, right? It means maybe I'm able to live a more mobile life, a little bit more independent life, but it doesn't mean that I'm not without my limitations, right? And without living in a world that's not quite built for me. For me, the social model really talks about society's need to eliminate barriers. And I think we're talking about barriers of all types, physical barriers, emotional barriers, and political barriers to a certain extent also. And that's where maybe we see some overlap into the rights and justice. But I do think as the academic, like I said, who put these kind of ideas together and the documents that we now call the social model is quoted as saying nothing to do with the body, that it's really saying it's society's job. Society is the one that is seeing the person with disability and not seeing them as integrated into the society as they could be. I think we're getting more towards, for lack of a better phrase, like an easier way of living for people with disabilities, right? Because that's, if we are talking about accessibility and like I said, even such things as unfortunately, we're still talking about ramps and how to enter a building, egress.
It's just like having a baby. Come on.
You wouldn't know.
3,
2,
1, 0. You made it.
Unfortunately, we're still talking about these ideas so many years after the rights movement, but I think at least that we're talking about them, we're being made aware of them, and that now society, I think, is also aware. And like something that I don't know if this model really talks about a lot is, how the media it comes into play with this now, right? Like, because the media has shown people with disabilities, and sometimes not in a fair light, most times not in a fair light, but nonetheless, society is now informed about people with disabilities through media. We are going to see society kind of take some responsibility. Right?
Yes,
and say that we do need some change.
That is a very hopeful sentiment. And the more awareness, the better, right? If people aren't seeing it, they don't even realize it's a problem. So it's an important step.
I think the further we get into present day, we need to really, another one of your producers and my favorite words, AJ, is nuance. We're not seeing enough nuance in the articulation of disability in terms of real life, day-to-day life people with disabilities, and also in terms of the narrative, the story models, the characters of people with disabilities. We're starting to get closer, right? We're moving away from the monster, right? The fear of it. And we're moving away from maybe the medical model. We're moving away from like showing like maybe the Elephant Man where he's taken in by a doctor. And now we're seeing maybe like The Mask with Cher.
My lawyer's name is B.D. Higgins, and he's told me of my rights. If you give me any shit at all, he's going to drag your ass into court.
Don't worry, Mr. Sims. I look weird, but otherwise I'm real normal.
But what I really want to see now is like the internalization, what it is from the character's point of view, the disabled character's point of view. And I think that's, if we're going to talk, the next one is the rights model, right? Where people with disabilities have the right to equal opportunity, and not just through society's eyes, but through legislation. Through the laws that are passed.
Sir, you're out of order.
Out of order? I show you out of order. There is nothing like the sight of an amputated spirit. There is no prosthetic for that.
Yeah, and I also think of the word equity too, because I feel like equality, a lot of people think, oh, you all get the same thing. Like, what's the problem? Whereas equity is creating access in place so that everyone can access the same things that they need. So like, I think of social security checks and like disability checks and how restrictive that is when it comes to someone with a disability. But then there's other restrictions. I think of like marriage equity does not exist. Like, it's not incentivized for people with disabilities to marry financially, and they face a lot of stigma with social constructs like having children. And
exactly. And I think that's part of it, right? I think that's, in a lot of these movies, the thing that I've kind of haven't really talked about, that's definitely part of the conversation of all of this, is that we're not seen as sexual beings.
What happens when people become attached to each other?
Maybe this is a bad idea.
I think you've done a great thing.
And there's a fear of even showing that, talking about it, representing it, but it is dehumanizing. To not think that people with disabilities do not have the same desires, wants, and needs, not just in the material world, but in the emotional world and in the physical world of touch, of love, is a little bit of, ridiculous to me. It reminds me of the movie Me Before You in 2016. We have somebody, right? And it's been a while since I watched the movie, and I watched it, and half discussed. We're seeing, I believe, a caretaker fall in love with the patient, right? And the patient is disabled, and he'd rather die than live with this disability. But he has the one thing that most of us long for most of our lives, which is love.
You know what I see when I look at you?
Don't say potential.
Potential. You need to widen your horizons, Clark. You only get one life. It's actually your duty to live it as fully as possible.
And in this story, he gets it. But what does he do? He says, no. He shuns it and says, I'd rather die because of this. But the thing that most movies have done, have put love up on this pedestal, which I think it should be. Love is a very powerful force in the world, and it should be a powerful force. But like to say that he just tosses it away is just another form of dehumanization. To me, it just doesn't show an authentic representation. And look, listen, here's where it's going to get a little dicey, right? Are there people out there who might rather die than be disabled? I'm sure there are, right? Yeah. But once again, we're back to the question of representation. What are we representing, right? Are we actually representing the full spectrum of disability? Because with this movie, we're not.
Right.
I want to talk about the opposite of that, where someone with disability does find love.
Have you ever seen Sex Education on Netflix?
I have seen a couple of episodes, yeah. It's a series, correct? Right.
Yeah, it's a series. Sadly, they announced their 4th season will be their last season, but that's okay. But there's a very, I think, well-rounded, enjoyable character named Isaac, who's like a wheelchair user. He's played by an actor who also has a spinal cord injury. He's like saucy. He's kind of a dick at first, but then he becomes a love interest. Like he has a lot about him, including his disability. Mm-hmm. But he's certainly not like a tokenized character as seen a lot in the past. And then there's another show on Netflix, just because I'm a Netflix watcher. There's a show called Midnight Club. Have you ever heard of that one?
I have not heard of that at all, honestly.
Here, I'll pitch it to you and you tell me if you think it sounds okay. There is a manor that is basically a hospice for teenagers, like young people who have unfortunately terminal diagnoses like cancer. And basically it's this group of maybe like 7 to 10 kids, and they're all ill, dealing with, meds, symptoms, depression, adjustment, isolation. Mm-hmm. But they kind of band together, and aside from their daily kind of activities like support group and whatever, every night at midnight they meet in the library to tell like spooky stories.
How long have you all been here?
4 months for me.
5.
3.
63 days, 17 hours, and 11 minutes.
You don't know the minutes.
And then like there's a whole diversity of representation, I guess. There's the kids are different races, they have different diseases. One's an amputee wheelchair user, who's like one of my favorite characters. Her name is Anya.
What was that about?
Yeah, Spence kind of hates Mark.
Why?
Well, he's young and cute and funny, and he ain't dying. What's not to hate?
She has a lot of scenes with like her prosthetic leg and in her wheelchair. And she has a whole arc because she used to be a ballet dancer before her injury. But I just thought it was cool that it was a show kind of centered on this group of kids who all have a chronic illness as like one of their identifying characteristics. But it's like none of them could be tokenized by their disease necessarily because they all had a similar situation. And so you got to really focus on the characters and like what they were each dealing with and how they supported each other. And it's spooky.
Yeah. So let me ask you, I love the concept. The synopsis you gave me sounds great. I'm gonna have to check it out just based on that. But like the stories, I have a question. The stories that these kids are telling, do they revolve around disability, or are they just kind of just spooky stories?
They're pretty much just spooky stories. Some of them are like crime related, like murder. Some of them have ghosts in them. Some of them do depict like the characters' sort of anecdotes of their own life. Like one of them has depression and she actually had a suicide attempt. So like that was incorporated into a story she had. But for the most part, it was like spookiness. And
yeah, I love that. I love that. I'm glad you told me that. Like, and this is what we're talking about with even in my opinion, the authentic is that we are still seeing kind of slice of life movies, in my opinion, and unfortunately, horror is a different, I take that as a different type of genre. We are in a lot of horror movies, and not in a good way. But other than that, I would love to see us, see people with disabilities in sci-fi movies, in more romantic comedies, in westerns, in fantasy movies. In Game of Thrones, Peter Dinklage was so awesome.
Legend.
Why'd you want to help him?
I have a tender spot in my heart for cripples, bastards, and broken things.
And thankfully, those people had, the wherewithal to do that. and to showcase it. I'm just happy that we're starting to cross over those barriers. I have a feeling, for me, this is just a personal thing, and I'd love any pushback you have on this, to be honest with you. I think that people just naturally have a fear of disability. I think there's a fear of the unknown, right? That's just a common thing with humans in general, that we just have a fear of the unknown. We're afraid of the dark because we don't know what's in the dark. And the same is with disability. We have a fear of disability because we don't know about it. And the reason we don't know about it is because it's not really represented enough in the media. And when it is represented, up until recently, like I said, it hasn't been represented correctly.
Yeah.
And authentically, right? And until we start to do that, in large numbers and across genres, I think only then will able-bodied people, the mainstream world, be able to see disability in a more nuanced, a more authentic way, and really get to see us and not the disability, right? Really just see us, because there is a universal within us, right? Like I was saying earlier about sex and sexuality. Like, we all want the same things out of life. We all want love and comfort and a little bit of stability in life. We all crave those things in life. And I think until we start really showing movies like that, showing stories like that, we're not going to be able to communicate to the mainstream, the able-bodied world, exactly who we are.
I mean, it's impossible for me to give you pushback on that, because I agree 100%. What it makes me think of is, taking a bigger look at fear of disability. I think there's a general fear of difference. So if we're looking at other film movements and representation, like racial representation, gender and like sexuality differences representation, that definitely preceded this current movement of disability representation. Hedwig and the Angry Inch was like, a mind-blowing moment when that movie came out.
How many times do I have to tell you? You don't put a bra in a dryer. It warps.
So I do think that there's precedence for this type of change. Disability, I think, finally has its moment now that everybody else so far gotten to be better represented. So it's the disability movement's turn. What I will say, I was prattling off some examples when you were talking about different genres. When it comes to sci-fi, in the Star Wars shows, especially the new ones like Book of Boba Fett and The Mandalorian, there's this whole like culture that they're creating as a backstory to like mods. So young people are modifying their bodies with like eyes and arms and healing themselves after like gunshot wounds.
Don't walk in. This woman is about to die. Well, you should have started with that.
That is becoming a normative thing in Star Wars lore, I guess.
Oh wow, that's pretty incredible. Because something that I didn't really get into in the Cinema of Isolation, the book, the author does talk about the high technology, right, and how that influences movie making. It's exactly what you're talking about. What you're talking about is sounds like science fiction, and it is science fiction. But what it makes me think of on a realistic level to me is adaptive technologies.
Yeah.
And as we get further into technology, we are being more mobile. We can be integrated in society a little bit easier and better with these adaptive technologies. So it is kind of
communication, like screen readers or voice, text to voice. Yeah.
And then we're going to have to reframe, what it is to be a person with disabilities, and that's going to be a continued conversation of that once we get to that point.
When it comes to fantasy, I recently watched part 1 of The Witcher on Netflix, which, don't get me started on that, but The Witcher does have some representations of disability, but I think it falls into the old tropes. Like one of the main characters, Yennefer, she starts as a young woman who was born with congenital deformities, and then she sacrifices her fertility with dark magic to become beautiful and free of her deformities. So like that, some problematic stuff there, but it's based on books and video games. And then you mentioned horror, and I totally know what you mean, because horror is like, you're trying to scare people. So classically, you want people to be horrified by disfigured, gross things. But I thought of Jordan Peele's Nope. Did you ever see that movie?
Did see Nope, yeah.
Yeah. And I don't think there's too many glaring examples of like at least apparent disabilities, except there's that one character who, I think her name is Mary Jo, and she was a co-star with Jupe. And so she is present at like a show, and she's in a power scooter. She has her face covered by a veil. And I feel like even though it's such a modern movie and a great movie, it's really unfortunate that they have that in there, even though it's part of the plot. I think it's an important visual image. And then when the I don't know creature jumps like, blood and waste, like her wheelchair is one of the things that just lands on top of the house, and it is a horrifying image.
Yeah, it is.
But then it also kind of really medicalizes and ostracizes wheelchair users.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, and the disabled character is seen as a device for either the plot or the protagonist, right? Because
or like the theme of the movie.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas exactly, and they're not seen as an actual kind of living, breathing character, which is something that we're craving. I'm craving to see at least. So.
Yeah, well, thank you for this very rich discussion. I love the discussion of like film along with these models that, people in like the disability advocacy or disability studies realms, they look at this academically, but I think for people outside of the movement and a lot of watchers of my channel might be like healthcare students or colleagues. Mm-hmm. I feel like grounding all these themes in culture and representations in media, I feel like that makes it really accessible. And, I've got some movies to watch now.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all that. I feel like we just did like a seminar or something.
I know, right? It does feel, and we kind of just got right into it. It was just like...
Are there any projects you're working on right now that you're really excited about?
So right now I'm working on several projects. The first one I'll talk about, I think you might be interested in, is AJ and your producer, AJ and I. He has a really great screenplay. It's a really great story, just involving people with disabilities. It's a little bit of I don't know if you remember the show 30 Something from back in the day. AJ loves that show. We talk about it. It's one of our inspirations for what he's doing. The Big Chill is another big inspiration for AJ, the movie. Kind of jumped on board with that project. Now he wants me to star in it a little bit here and there, which is going to be kind of...
You are good in front of the camera.
Thank you. We'll see. We'll see what happens. I agreed to do it, so now I kind of feel like I have to do it. But I do want to do it. I'm excited about the project. I think he has like a great script, some great ideas. So I'm working on that with AJ. I'm also currently working on a project of my own. I'm working on a boxing movie. My character is like a coach who wants to be a coach, a boxing trainer. He has physical limitations. He's physically disabled, but he wants to be a part of this kind of hyper masculine world. And I think the themes are about how a person with disability, a person with disability fits into this idea of what masculinity is, especially in the new age of how we're living and in the current cultural world. So I'm exploring those themes, and also it's a little bit like going to therapy, if I'm being honest and vulnerable. There's a lot of kind of stuff that I'm learning about myself and learning about the genre specifically in the world of boxing. And what a lot of people know is there's a lot of trainers who have had physical disabilities. And I don't feel like, and it's only doing research that I found that out, and that's not something that's well known.
That sounds like a really important perspective to share. Thank you for opening up a little bit about that. That sounds like a really cool movie. Definitely better than the sports type of movies that represent disability. Even in recent memory, like AJ and I broke down the Champions trailer, the Woody Harrelson movie.
Yeah.
And it looked like a funny movie, but it was the same kind of like, disgraced coach is punished and has to do community service with a team of disabled athletes. It's a charity model.
Yeah, and the coach is the protagonist, right? Not anybody with this. See, and there we go again, where we're not. Part of this conversation also is about like taking the lead role, right? So the only way we're going to cross that barrier and cross that bridge is to have just stories where the lead character is a person with disabilities, and we're seeing this story unfold through their eyes, and this story is their story, not like you said, the coach or the whoever, So.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, I can't wait to see what work you come up with next. I love getting all these film recommendations, so keep them coming. And if you ever want to like break down a particular piece, like if it's an episode or a movie, love to do it. I think we've talked about TV shows in the past, but we can pick, whatever would actually be fun.
Yeah, I think, it's got my my little hamster wheels turning, because now we talked about so many movies that now it's going to be hard to choose which one we might want to talk about. That's going to have to be another discussion you and I have, because this week. Yeah,
I know. I try to pick ones where, not every work is perfect, but I try to pick ones that have some redeeming qualities so that we can at least say, okay, they deserve some credit for doing this, like we're moving in this direction. And that's why I haven't done things like Me Before You, just because I know it's not helpful to like lift that movie up, and I totally agree, because there have been movies where I don't want to watch it, but
there is a part of me that's like, know your enemy. You know what I mean? And we got to know the things that we're fighting against in order to fight the fair fight and fight the right fight. So if I don't know what's out there and what's being portrayed or displayed or depicted and represented, then how am I going to combat that? I feel the only way I can combat that is by learning about the things I might not want to learn about, unfortunately. But
that's true. Oh, that's so wise. Know your enemy. So just kind of recognizing what we're still up against and what we need to overcome. And it's that extra burden of advocacy where I always want the movement to feel inclusive to anybody. And no one's usually intentionally trying to be a harmful, problematic person. Okay. Even getting familiar with the stuff that doesn't feel right or doesn't feel comfortable, you're turning it into an opportunity for learning.
Exactly. And I think movies like, Me Before You and some of the other ones we talked about, I don't think they're coming from a malicious place.
Right.
I think they're just coming from an ignorant place, unfortunately.
If you want to hear more conversations like this, hit that like button and subscribe to This Ability Clinic for more accessible and entertaining education. Till next time, thank you for watching, listening, and learning. See ya.